Happy Saturday, Leap Mayors. We're back at it again. Welcome to the Module 9 of Leaders for Excellence in Public Service, or Leap Mayors webinar series. We thank our partners, San Miguel Corporation, for supporting this program. And of course, you, our Mayor Fellows, who have always been diligent in participating in our webinar since we started last June. In the past months, we've had a wide range of topics from redesigning the new normal, data management and public communication, relationship of the national government and the local government, and many more. For today, we're going to try to take a closer and more personal look at the crisis phenomenon. But before we introduce our speaker, I would like to call on Mr. Harvike, our lead convener at Kaya Natin, for the welcome remarks.
Good afternoon to our dear mayors and our LEAP fellows. We have been in quarantine for almost 7 months already. We started last March. Akala nating lahat matatapos to ng siguro June, July, no? But apparently, as Dr. Elgin has said, no, the virus continues to be contagious, continues to spread, and many of us continue to stay home. One of the major issues that is coming out now, 7 months after quarantine, is that there are many fellow Filipinos that are now suffering from mental health illness. This is probably because there's a lot of problems that have been caused by this virus, not just in terms of public health, but we are also looking at poverty, hunger, employment, and even education. So ang daming problema na dala nitong virus na to, and therefore many of our fellow Filipinos have been suffering. And what is sad is this virus has not spared any Filipino at all. Mayaman, mahirap, walang pinipili ang virus na to. Kaya sabi ng DOH, we should stay at home. We should try our best to avoid crowded places, avoid family gatherings, avoid physical gatherings with our friends. And this is probably the reason why many Filipinos are now suffering also from mental health. Filipinos are by nature very sociable beings. We love being with our families. We love being with our friends. Gustong-gusto natin na nakakasama yung mga mahal natin sa buhay. Pero ngayon, dahil sa nangyayaring crisis, hindi natin sila nakakasama. So it is very apt that given this pandemic, we have invited an expert to talk about mental health, wellness in this time of pandemic. We would like to welcome and thank, of course, our guest for this afternoon, si Dr. Anselmo Tronco. Thank you so much, Doc, for making time for our mayors this afternoon. Thank you, Doc, for taking the time out to share with our mayors your knowledge about how we can continue to manage our mental health, especially in this time of COVID, and how our mayors can also implement programs on mental health for their constituents. Napakahalaga nito. In many countries and even here in the Philippines, we have seen many Filipinos suffer. But we can do our own share to alleviate their suffering if we only have the right knowledge, the right skills, and the right programs in mind. Thank you, mayors, for continuing to be at the front lines of this pandemic. Sabi nga ni Dr. Elgin din kanina sa kanyang brief sharing, kayo yung na-expose, di ba? You have no choice. Bumababa kayo sa mga barangays, bumababa kayo sa iba't ibang mga health centers, kinitingnan niyo yung isolation facilities ninyo, nakikipag-usap kayo kung kani-kanino. And sadly, when you get exposed, sometimes you get sick. And when you get sick, it's very tough, no? So that's why saludo talaga kami sa inyong mga mayors. Many people have said that the medical frontliners are heroes, pero para sa akin, kayo ring mga mayors ay mga bayani. In this very difficult times, you chose to lead and you continue to lead. So maraming salamat again to our guest today, si Dr. Tronco, for making time. We hope that our mayors will interact with him. Feel free to ask him questions. Feel free to engage with him. in this discussion because mental health wellness is a very important aspect in our fight against COVID-19. Maraming salamat po and welcome to another module of LEAP.
Thank you, Sir Harvey. For this webinar, our topic is mental health wellness and psychosocial intervention for LGU officials and the local community. Before we call on our guest speaker, ito po muna yung house rules natin. First, we will be putting everyone on mute to avoid distraction in the webinar, but we highly encourage you to turn on your video if internet connectivity allows. Second, there will be a Q&A session after the talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat even if the talk is still ongoing. Babasahin po namin yun later. Third, after the short Q&A, we will be having a workshop where you will be automatically assigned to join a breakout room and yung KN staff po na nandito will be facilitating the discussion. We will give further instructions on that later, so don't worry. And lastly, this webinar is being broadcasted live via Kaya Natin's official Facebook page, so feel free to share away. And now, to introduce our speaker who has been very enthusiastic to join us here in LEAP, Dr. Anselmo Tronco is a social and community psychiatrist, an uncommon subspecialty in the Philippines and Asia. He is considered as one of the few whose practice as a social and community psychiatrist has been sustained since 1989. Presently, he serves as the chairperson of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine at the University of the Philippines Philippine General Hospital, or UP-PGH. In 2016, he co-authored a book on mental health care, highlighting 25 years of experience on disaster mental health, and has been translated in 2 languages, Vietnamese and Mongolian. Moreover, his work contributed to the development of models of mental health services in the Philippines. To share with us now his expertise on mental health, please welcome Dr. Anselmo Tronco. Dr. Anselmo, I ask you po to unmute sa option.
Good afternoon. Can I be heard?
Yes po.
Okay. Magandang hapon. Magmula Sulu hanggang Batanes. This is a much welcome conversation, mainly because mental health seems to be a distant cousin of general health care. It has been the tradition in the past, and even in governments, the funds for the provision of mental health services is actually at the lowest rung of the heap. It brings a lot of structural and systems problems with regards to mental health provision even before the pandemic. The sad thing is, in a situation where mental health is not given such attention before COVID, mental health becomes more difficult to put a program for because clearly the urgent thing is to get people to survive this pandemic. But I'm very happy that LEAP is saying that let's talk about mental health. Pag-usapan natin to because as Mr. Kes said, 7 months after the epidemic, it is critical that we talk about the way people feel, the way people cope, the way people solve problems in this physical distancing and this sense of isolation. So the title of my topic is Mental Health Issues in the COVID Pandemic, the Role of the Local Government. I will discuss 5 issues. What are the phases of the disaster? the principles of mental health intervention in disaster. And the main course of my topic is to really look at the cultural values embedded in us, from which our resilience are drawn from. Then I will talk about the public mental health wellness framework in disaster. And I will end the lecture talking about health systems' view of mental health intervention, particularly the role of local government in the development of community mental health programs. The definition is complex emergencies is a combination of man-made and natural hazards. This generally involve violence and loss of life, which is happening, has happened. The displacement of population, we also see that happen. And the extensive damage to societies and economies. And this is actually the difficult balance right now that makes it very critical for the planning bodies of the government to balance economy and keeping people safe. There is a lot of discourse about this. And given this definition, COVID 19 is in fact a complex and a difficult disaster. What are the phases of a disaster? Where are we now? Phase 1. Before March 15, or even before we saw in the news that there were people infected, one or two in the news, we were already anticipating that it might come in our shores. There was fear, there was uncertainty, there was a feeling of losing control, and we felt vulnerability. Now, when it really became evident that the COVID 19 is really among us, we had intense emotional reactions. We know it's for real, it's with us. And our reactions range from some people were shocked, some people panicked, some people were confused, some people were in disbelief. Concretely, this is expressed when people wiped out alcohol and other things from the shelves and even food from the shelves of the grocery stores. I'm sure you also saw that in your own community. Next slide. Now, the heroic phase. There is a lot of activity, but there is low level of productivity in this period. There is a lot of altruism, and many community members exhibit adrenaline-induced rescue behavior. And the urgent need to respond makes people think less clearly. This is a time when there was no clear protocol yet for the management of people who were sick. There was not yet a very clear definition of how this virus was transmitted. There was yet no specific and concrete ways through which we would be able to control the spread of the disaster. Particularly, the doctors were even wondering what to do in many patients that they find in the hospital. So people wanted to help, but because of the limited information, there was also a sense and a realistic sense that they just have to do what they can at the moment to help the patients. The honeymoon phase. This is now the beautiful phase, like in marriage. For 6 months, everything seems good. Nothing seems to be wrong. There is assistance that is readily available. In PGH, the hotels around PGH, even the lodging houses around PGH, even LaSalle, the restaurants around PGH provided food 24/7. Transportation was given, volunteer transportation was given by people who wanted to help. There is a lot of community bonding. We, as Mr. Kes said, this level of the rich and the poor. those who live in the high places and in the communities of Baseco. We were one facing the same unseen enemy. And there was a lot of optimism that everything will return to normal quickly. Of course, of course, that did not come to pass. We are then, as now, still unable to fully grasp how we can survive this pandemic. As a result, numerous opportunities are available for providers and organizations establish and build rapport with affected people and groups, and for them to have relationships with stakeholders. Now, the disillusionment phase. Just like in any relationship, you see what's wrong with the other person. You begin to realize that there is something almost difficult to swallow in the kind of person that you decided to live with or to have a relationship with. And in the disaster, we as individuals and communities, mayors, you realize that there are limits for disaster assistance. You probably also realize that 6,500 two tranches is not even enough to help your constituents who, to start with, were poor and were living on the edge of society. There is an increasing gap between the need and assistance, and there might be a sense that you were abandoned. You probably feel that as mayors. After the initial um, help, at some point you end up saying, I am the one here, I'm in control of my town, and I have to work through given our own resources in the community. I could almost imagine at some point you began to feel that way. And this could last months, even 2 years. Now, many of us are now in the reconstruction phase, even if we still have yet to finally identify that there is an effective vaccine. We began to assume responsibility for rebuilding our lives, and we begin to adjust to a possibly new way of doing things. This could last for years. For many people, for many people, they have discovered things that they did not discover before. For example, one doctor realized that I'm really good at being a doctor. I'm really good at helping people who are sick. I'm not that good in really being at home and living with my children and playing with them. But some parents also realize that they could actually live and be and know the people they did not quite spend time with because they began to appreciate who they really are, who their children are. Their teachers, their kids would teach them new things. They would also teach new things to the kids. So there is a lot of discovery of what is good in us and what is good among our friends and family. Last, next slide. Given that context, given the context that 7 months after the onset of the pandemic in the Philippines, many of us are now in the reconstruction phase. And many of you mayors are probably already beginning to feel that you have to put a leash of this situation in your hands. Now, what is it that we can do? But before we do that, what is mental health intervention across the phases of disaster? What principles or assumptions guide when you think of mental health in disaster? This is not new to us. In the Philippines, in our memory, 1990, the earthquake in Nueva Ecija up to Baguio, and the visual image of the Hyatt terraces hotel in Baguio is a concrete image at how an earthquake or a disaster could create havoc to communities. Since then, we have participated in programs for disaster. Yolanda, Pablo in Iligan, even the one in Ormoc, the flood, Pinatubo in 1991, even Undoy here in Manila, Taal. We have been through that, and we have been mindful about the mental health issues that ensue after disaster strikes. But this pandemic is a complex disaster, far more difficult than any disasters we encountered, because when Taal erupted, it is quite time limited. When Pinatubo erupted, it's time limited. This one is not quite the same. So, what are the critical principles? What is it that we need to remember? One, we need to conceptualize the mental health program in the light of how we as Filipinos feel, think, and behave. Several concepts are important. We as a Filipino speak of levels of being connected to one another, but we want and we are driven to connect with one another. So, pakikiisa, the highest level of being connected, is something that I'm sure you may still feel that there are some things where your people actually work as one. It's actually not far from a memory. I think the single most important illustration before COVID is when Holy Week comes. We are one in celebrating Easter and even the week of faith among Catholics. I could only use the Catholic image because I'm Catholic, so it's something that is very familiar with me. At some point, there is a sense that we are one as a people. And there were many other points in history which speaks that somehow there is a sense of being one as a people. This can well be also an occasion when, as leaders of your community, we could strive to create occasions when we could get people in our communities see themselves as one with the other. Kamusta? Simple lang ito na word. Pero hindi lahat ng kultura nagtatanong in the kamusta sense the way we actually evoke wanting to engage and talk. It is a language of connectedness of the Filipino. When we ask, kamusta ka na? It's not about the weather. We actually, in our language of Pinoy, when we say kamusta ka na, we actually want to find out what's going on with the life of the other person. And then we actually feel a certain sense of connectedness with the person who responds to our question, kamusta ka? And then the third concept, which is important, is yung loob. Actually, kung titingnan natin, ang kalooban natin is a very important concept in the Pinoy way. Kasi, one way of looking sa Tagalog, no? Although I'm Ilonggo, ang resilience in English can be translated as malakas ang loob. That is seemingly the most accurate translation of resilience, the ability to bounce back from any adversity. And then another important thing is that in the fabric of our interaction with people, or even with the people you work with, or even in the people you take care of in your communities, it's very essential that me knows paano makipagkapwa. Na naiintindihan natin ang ibig sabihin ng makipagkapwa ka. Next slide. Now, specific disaster mental health intervention. Number one, most people do not become shells of their former selves. Hindi maraming tao ang nagkakaroon ng serious mental health issues because of this disaster. Most of us have the capacity to bounce back. Number two, a most important thing to be communicated. When we make people we get in contact with feel the normalcy of emotional reactions to this pandemic, whether it is being anxious, whether it is being uncertain, whether it is being out of control, it actually brings some, all of us, to have some control of their life situation. A very simple validation that this emotional reaction of fear, anxiety, is a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. Number three, communal grief. Usually, grief is defined in the context of loss of a person, of something very important, be it a loved one, being a very important thing that you hold dear, or a memento from loved ones when there is a fire that hits your home, or losing something very important emotionally to you. But in communal grief, we go beyond being depressed. We are all experiencing probably this sense once in a while of being depressed as a community. We feel anxious. We probably sometimes feel angry because help is not coming. We probably feel overwhelmed because there is so many financial obligations that would not seem to be settled, and many of us don't. Some of us don't have work, but we reach a level of acceptance, and then, and then, and then, one day, if you look back to the past 7 months, there might have been an occasion when we actually found the meaning and purpose of this pandemic, which is really about bringing us to a transformative state beyond this pandemic. Next slide. Can I ask for the next slide? Okay, here. Number further, the principles. We need to put a structure, predictability in the regularity, in the things that we can still do to establish a sense of control. It can be as simple as keeping your walking 6 to 8 hours, as Dr. Erlene, Mayor Erlene said, as predictable as the sun that rises in the east. We should be mindful that we should remain to have some structure and predictability in our lives. If you used to sleep at 10 p.m. and wake up at 4:30, then maintain that. Do not change that. If you find pleasure in going to your garden and taking care of it every morning, do not change that. It is an anchor that gives us a sense of control. And then we should access prompt and accurate updates from legitimate sources to diminish one's sense of uncertainty, but not too much. One should limit getting information because we could be overwhelmed by the information we read or hear on TV. And then this is for you, mayors. This is a special thing I have shared each time I talk about disaster. The local leaders should provide prompts and appropriate psychosocial response to the community. This is your ballgame. Next slide. Now, this is the main course of my topic. I notice that there is a lot of discourse about what has not been done by government or what is lacking in our disaster response. There is a lot of sense and discourse kung anong kulang sa ginagawa ng ating gobyerno. Pero hindi ba pwede nang pag-uusapan din natin yung mga bagay-bagay na nakakagaan ng kalooban? Nakakabigay ng sense of security that there is something that's being done for us or for our communities? Imagine how it will be as a mayor when your people do not feel that our mayor puts sense and order to our community. Mayor Erlene was talking about their community not having a COVID case. I'm really happy because my niece is mayor of a small town in Tigbawan, and I keep in touch with my siblings. And I'm really happy that up to now, our town doesn't have a COVID case. But the other towns before and after have COVID cases. I'm quite impressed with the mayor of our town. She's very strict. She's very strict, but she's able to define things even if the people in our community, of course, are her grandmothers, her grandfathers, her uncles, and aunts. But she insists that there is a sense of order. Quarantine 14 days, no visitors to the quarantine area, food will be provided, there's a guard in the school where they're quarantined, that's it. Marketing, it's scheduled. You only go to the market 3 times a week at this particular time in this particular barangay, so that it becomes easy to monitor people. Now, why am I putting a lot of importance to this main course of my lecture? We need to discourse about the positive things in our culture. We need to do that because from it we draw our strength in this complex disaster. We need to do this because in the reconstruction phase, we need to go back to certain things that have not changed or were not taken away by this pandemic, because it is embedded in the way we live as a people. What is that? The sense of humor of the Filipino. Give any situation to a Filipino of adversity, and the Filipino will look for something good and find humor in that situation. I'm sure that is familiar with you. Number 2, we take it for granted. We take it for granted, but the value of a sense of gratitude is extremely critical in how we can survive this pandemic. Number 3, spirituality and religiosity. The single most important way through which people, especially Filipinos, will get over this experience. One study about suicide in the US identified 2 very important things that make people less likely to consider suicide in the light of COVID. What are these? 2, it's being connected in the way that we feel that we are not alone. And 2, the sense of spirituality. And 3, the sense of meaning during the COVID crisis. We have it actually, which brings me to the 4th value in our culture. Family as a source of support and sharing the same grief. We Sir Ke mentioned that in this pandemic it's difficult because as a people, we actually really find it very important to be with our family. It is always an occasion to go back when you're in Manila. Me, for example, I go home 3 times to 4 times a year. What is the meaning of that? It's not about to take a vacation. It's being to be with a family and a clan. Because it is so important to my being a person that I am connected to a family and a clan in our small town. And then what happens is, because we are so connected with our family and our clan even, we have this sense that we are not alone, that we have someone we could lean on in any time and in any crisis. And lastly, the bayanin spirit is still there. I'm sure our mayors here have seen how people live up to the occasion when people are asked to help in the spirit of doing things for the community and for others in your town. I am very sure that there is still that spirit that prevails because it is embedded in our culture. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Now, you are probably expecting me to talk about what are the specific interventions we need to do. But I don't think this is the occasion for me to talk about what to do really in terms of specific interventions for mental health, but to give you a broad map to look at mental health from the viewpoint of public mental health. In this slide, although you cannot see the lower bottom of this pyramid, this pyramid gives us a public health perspective in mental health. At the lowermost part of this pyramid are social considerations and basic services. You know this better than me. Why? Because if there is anything that a mayor needs to put order to, is that social services, peace and order, and protection of rights of people in your community is the basic. Now you will wonder, is that mental health? It is. Because mental health cannot be without the sense of safety and the sense that I live in a community well, where I could sleep well at night, where I have food. That is a mental health issue. As Mr. Kes said earlier, poverty actually is one of the single most important determinants of health. Meaning that when people could not eat, when people could not have the means to travel for work, when people could not provide services and support for their children, one cannot talk about mental health because mental health is anchored in the provision of those basic services. We move on to this pyramid and strengthening community and family supports. We have the basic family support. We have communal traditional supports. If you go, for example, to the north, to the Cordilleras, to Sagada, the celebrations are very communal when they do their kanyao. They do this communal ritual. And what is that? That is a concrete illustration that community support is an essential part of their mundane life. Now, what can we do? When Mayor Arlene, I heard him talk about him predictably walking 6 to 8 hours, running or walking 6 to 8 hours every day. And then people begin to engage with him. What is that? That is really about a sense that we can do things together. I don't know if Mayor Arlene was familiar with that. I mean, was aware of that. But when I listened to him, this is what we call a symbolic meaning that the mayor is connected with the people and they do things together in the structure of a walk in the morning from 6 to 7 every day. I don't know what other community support you can have, but that is for you to engage the people in your community. To what extent can we create this community connection or strengthen it? Now, there is the health system that has a role here. In the past, people did not talk mental health in the RHU. It seems to be foreign in the language of health. Now, we really need to engage people about health beyond physical. We need to talk about their emotional reactions to this uncertain situation and the very simple act of listening to their stories and telling them that what you're going through is also shared by me. That can, at the very least, be done by the healthcare workers. That is already a very important mental health intervention as far as mental health support for the disaster. At the top of this pyramid, only a few people will need specialized services. Psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists, they are only for a few that will need mental health intervention and those in crisis. The critical thing here is that when people get ill and identified to have more than just the normal reaction, is there a way that this person can be brought to a mental health facility or someone who knows how to deal with the psychiatric crisis? How far is it? Is there a provision of transportation by the community? Is there a provision for medications? So here it is very critical to have a map. Where do we bring the people who will need specialized mental health service? Imagine a region, imagine a province. What is a network through which mental health services can be provided to the single person in your community in a particular family so that no one falls in the cracks? Next slide. Now, this is the map. We have always been talking about the individual when we speak of mental health. That seems to be important because suicide is an important concern. And we need to get people out of that situation where they will probably end their lives. It's very important. But we also need to see mental health intervention in the context of the family. Dito lang tayo sa Pilipinas na walang schedule kung hayaan ng Pinoy na 8 to 10, 4 to 5 sa public hospital kung pwede lang. Dito lang sa Pilipinas na jeep ang nilalagyan ng pasyente at buong pamilya o kamag-anak ang pumupunta sa emergency room. Dito lang sa Pilipinas na ang bisita ng pasyente kahit sa ward, hindi mo mapigil ang mga tao bumisita, uncle, cousins, even friends. Because we see ourselves in the context of a family. And lastly, we have to look at these interventions in the light of living in the community. And this is exactly why it's so important that you local mayors will have to see it in the context of you making sure or thinking about ways that mental health intervention is implemented in that particular family in your town, in that particular person in the town. It's a tall order, but you could start from somewhere. Now, what is the view of things? Hindi lang siya tungkol sa physical condition, hindi lang siya sa psychological reaction, hindi lang the social situation of that person. We posit strongly that it has to be a bio, psychosocial, and spiritual view of health. Now, if you look at the slide, there are 3 black arrows going downwards. Immediate response is different from intermediate response and long-term response, but this is not the details. I'm just saying that There is an immediate, short term, and then a long term response for mental health issues. Now, what is it that we really want to achieve? One day, when we went through a state of this equilibrium as we are now in, we will reach a type of equilibrium, but just maybe, as we are going through reconstruction, we could actually transform ourselves and our community better than what we were in the period before the pandemic. To cite, for example, one instance, in Iloilo, I was so impressed when I heard that the rich people in Iloilo funded the feeding programs of the mayor immediately. I really think that is a transformation of a community to be one with one another. Next slide. This is 8 to 9 minutes. This is the video. This is a very concrete ways to cope with the pandemic to keep oneself healthy. Can we listen to it? This was made by the West Visayas State University College of Medicine, and they lent it to us to PGH, and we revised it a little.
Ways to keep emotionally healthy in these times of stress, anxiety, and uncertainty.
One, keep yourself safe. Follow guidelines of DOH and WHO to avoid spreading and getting the infection. 2. Keep yourself healthy. Get enough sleep. Keep hydrated. Regularly eat healthy. Exercise regularly. 3. Find meaning in what you are doing. Make each day an opportunity to make a difference. 4. Be empathetic and compassionate. Remember, each of us is undergoing stress and uncertainty, and we never know what difficulties each one is facing. 5. Practice gratefulness and positivity. Pray or take time for your spiritual practice. Remind yourself of what's going well in your life. Experience of positive emotions enhances resilience. 6. Know when to disconnect. When work is over, it is over. Avoid consuming too much electronic media. 7. Make and keep a set routine. Organize and plan your days to find suitable rhythm for you. Structure and routine helps ward off feelings of helplessness and lack of control. Take short breaks to rejuvenate and relieve stress for the long haul. 8. Keep in touch. Text or call friends and loved ones. Keep abreast of the news and announcements from reliable sources. Appropriately express feelings while maintaining social distancing. 9. Be aware of how you react to stress and change negative ways of coping. Identify your triggers. Humor, sports, music, and arts are helpful. Avoid alcohol, drugs, and overeating. Meditate. 10. Recognize signs of burnout and mental health problems. Recognize emotional exhaustion, such as a low sense of involvement, low energy, and sleep disturbance as signs of burnout. Thoughts of suicide and self-harm are psychiatric emergencies. Talk to us. If you have concerns about your emotional well-being. The Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine is offering the following services. Psychosocial care hotline for PGH frontliners. For emergency concerns, please call 0956 4720 646. For non-emergency concerns, please call 0977 691 2115.
Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide. Health systems view is actually dates back even to the 70s. But the health systems view has also got into the field of engineering and other fields, the pure sciences. But health system, the systems view, we are using the health systems view as a way of concretizing in a map and as a way of ending this lecture. One, I earlier alluded to look at mental health intervention at the level of the individual, the smallest circle, in the context of the family, in the context of the community. You are actually the one who takes care of the structures that make living well in your community possible. So it's a big job, but mental health will have to be viewed beyond the community where you live, and even in terms of the policy and systems beyond your own community, which can be reflected in your own community as a national and government defines policies and systems in education, in economy, in politics, and other culture, in many dimensions of these structures that are inherent in any community. So my way of attacking this is to just present what are the mental health problems that might be relevant to look at. At the level of, this is not inclusive of all, but I'm just creating a sense of what are the possible scenarios when you think about mental health issues in the individual level. Number one, a century-old problem, centuries of stigmatization. People used to keep their mentally ill in prison. And in far distant places, it is still happening now. How much is stigma existing in your community about mental health? Do we keep our mentally ill at home and not talk about it and bring them to the hospital and just put them in chains? Kasi nakakahiya. Number two, is mental health education part or parcel of the education of our kids, of our high school students, or even of college students? Is there an intentional way through which we talk about mental health? Is there provision of medications for those who are found mentally ill? Is there provision for appropriate mental health services at the level of the town or the barangay, at the level of the district hospital, at the level of the province, and at the level of the region? To what extent are we able to provide these services which is accessible and appropriate so that no one falls in the cracks of the health system? The community, I could not see number one, but this really talks about, is there support for the educational needs of students now that we are on online learning? In fact, one of the critical problems that we face in the College of Medicine was at least 30 students in the College of Medicine did not have access to gadgets, and many more was not connected to the internet. So it created such a problem. What was done? We appealed for donors, and good that gadgets were provided to the students, even support for their internet connection. And then in terms of policy, the biggest circle in this map, do the local government institutions actually collaborate with one another, like in a symphony? For example, agriculture. Is it connected with the social services? Is it connected to the educational stakeholders in your community? Even the priests, even the doctors and nurses. Is there, in fact, a mechanism that people could actually sit down and plan out? Because this is very unusual time. And number two, are the local mental health resources adequate to provide for the mental health needs of your community? That's my last slide, and then I now go to the summary. Next slide. To summarize, any mental health program that you create should be sensitive to your needs in the community. Most emotional reactions to this pandemic, our reactions, are healthy responses to an abnormal situation. Our resilience as a people, it is still there, coming from the values that we hold dear. We are family centered, we have the Bayanihan spirit, we have spirituality and religiosity, we have humor, and lastly, a sense of gratefulness. Next slide. The public health perspective for mental health intervention should guide the programs in the community. There should be provision for food and shelter and a good place to live in. Number two, enhancement of community support beyond the inherent family support that should be provided. The local institutions should provide immediate services to those who are in crisis. Next slide. The public health perspective should guide the mental health programs in the country. This is my bid. This has always been my bid for 30 years. The primary healthcare approach is a backbone of the program where the local healthcare workers can provide the initial assessment and simple mental health intervention in the local health service. This is really my main bid. And number five, only a minority will need specific specialized psychiatric services, and provision of mechanism for access to appropriate care is necessary. With that, and then lastly, a health system's view is necessary for an effective intervention in mental health. Considers the individual in the context of his family, his community, and the institutions that make his community well for living. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tronco, for your discussion on mental health. At this point, bago po tayo magkaroon ng workshop session, baka may mga quick questions po kayo na gustong itanong kay Dr. Tronco. Now is the time to do so. Yeah. You may chat or use the raise hand option lang po if you have any question. Anybody po? Alright. I guess later na lang po tayo mag-open discussion after... Oh, Mayor Joseph, would you like to ask a question po?
Magandang hapon po. I just want to know, since you're an expert on mental health, what is the status of the mental health of the Filipinos before the pandemic and during the pandemic? How are the Filipinos coping with this problem?
I am not part of government, so there are stories that are shared, anecdotal. For example, the hotline that NCMH mans, the National Center for Mental Health, the biggest hospital in our country for the mentally ill, with 4,000 bed capacity. Okay, there was more than 300% rise in the hotline calls. So people who are in crisis or who wants help concretely for the mental health problems, they access this hotline. So you now see the picture about uh, people seeking help.
Maybe it has something to do with economics.
A lot to do with economics. The single most important predictor of mental health problems is poverty.
But compared to other nationalities, ang mga Pilipino po ay masyadong resilient when it comes to this compared to the Western countries wherein yung kanilang mga citizens ay napakaliit na mga bagay ay talagang sila ay nagkakaroon ng mental problems compared to the Filipinos na there is the humor, there is the family orientation ng mga Pilipino. I believe it helps doon sa ating not widespread problem on mental health.
Mayor, actually, I would bring you back to the Katrina problem in Louisiana in the U.S. Diba? That time,
Okay.
we were a little younger at that time. When Katrina hit Louisiana and the poor states of the U.S., people were angry. And people were angry to the extent that they're saying that if we are a rich state like New York or California, then probably federal help would come easier. In stark contrast, I see someone here from Bogabon, Samar, and that's one area where Yolanda struck several years ago. And we've been through communities devastated by the typhoon. Okay? The amazing thing about the Filipino when you listen to them. Lost homes, no food, no clothes in disaster evacuation centers. The Filipinos are so thankful that people come for help. No matter how small. It's just amazing. It's a way of looking at things. It's a sense of gratefulness. I could even imagine, kayo po siguro nararamdaman nyo rin po yun eh. Hindi naman ho ganun kalaki ang 6'5" na SAP. Pero hindi nyo ba naramdaman kung gaano kalaki ang pasasalamat ng mga tao na binigyan ng mga tauhan nyo? Didn't they express it?
Ang nakita ko lang po doon ay yung during the time na there is a crisis, ay they were able to see a leader that will lead them and tell them what to do. Although we have meager resources, pero nakita nila na mayroong namumuno sa kanila.
Very important. Because the kind of order that each human being in your community needs is that there is a leader that says, I am in control. And in this situation that we are all out of control with this pandemic, that symbol is very important. Schools should still continue. If we can, the churches should continue hearing, we should continue hearing mass. The mayor should be still visible in the community because you are a symbol of order. So ang laki-laki ng role ng mayor.
Symbol of order and hope.
Yes. So ang laki-laki ng kahulugan ng nandun kayo sa inyong towns. Magtanong kayo sa mga tauhan nyo kasi itong bagay na to, di ba? Haka-haka natin kasi hindi naman tayo masyadong nagtatanong. Pero magtanong kayo sa mga ilang tao sa pinupuntahan nyo, ano bang kahulugan na nakikita nyo, Mayor, at ano bang tingin nyo sa ginagawa ko? You'll be surprised that it's very important to people in the community.
At nakita ko rin po during the pandemic, during the time na talagang ang mga tao ay in chaos, hindi nila alam kung ano talaga ang mangyayari. Nakita nila na yung mga namumuno sa kanila na naglilid at binibigyan nila ng respeto. Compared before, nung wala silang pahalaga sa mga namumuno sa kanila, But during the time of pandemic, scared din sila, takot sila, hindi nila alam kung anong gagawin, hindi nila alam kung anong mangyayari sa kanila. Nakita nila na yung mga namumuno, yung mga chief executive sa kanya-kanya mga bayan, ayun ang pinagkatiwalaan nila, mas pinagkakatiwalaan nila na makakatulong sa kanila during the time ng crisis.
Nakakatuwa nga eh. It is actually bringing the best in many of us.
Opo.
Diba?
Nung nagkaroon po ng crisis ay ang mga leaders ng kanya-kanyang estilo, and yet we come out na naging maayos yung ating pagpapatakbo doon sa ating crisis. Which is I believe ito yung qualities ng mga Pilipino na dapat nating i-explore para pagdating ng panahon ay magamit natin para mas maging matibay tayo bilang mamamayang Pilipino.
Well put, Mayor. Well put. I'm really happy to hear that from you.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mayor Joseph. I'm sure yung ibang mayors po may mga gusto ring ibahagi later. So hindi ko na po papatagalin. We will go into our workshop session. So for us to better know how we can put our learnings on mental health into application, we will be dividing you into breakout groups. So meron po tayong 4 groups, and each group will be facilitated by a KN staff. For the breakout room 1, nandyan po si Aika. For the second room, si Camille. For the third, si Kent. And for the fourth room, si Mimi. So last week po, I texted you yung 4 na questions, which we will also flash today. Yung answers nyo po doon, ibabahagi nyo sa inyong mga groups, and then you will be having 20 minutes to share within your group. Please also choose one representative per group na magbabahagi po ng summary of your discussion. After the sharing, babalik po tayo dito sa main room, and each representative will be given 5 minutes to share what their group discussed. So, pasadahan ko po ulit yung questions na i-share nyo sa inyong mga rooms. For our first question po, what are some pressing mental health issues that you have observed in your LGU? Second, what intervention programs do you presently have to address these problems? Third, what are the resources that you have to address these problems? And fourth, with the talk given, what new solutions or interventions do you plan to deliver to your LGU? Your facilitators po na KN staff will also be chatting these questions sa inyong chat box para mag-guide po kayo. So kapag lumabas na po sa inyong mga screens yung option na join breakout room, please just click para po makapasok kayo. And I will now be opening the breakout rooms.